Keanu Reeves sat alone in the quiet corner of his home late at night when something unusual caught his attention. A small envelope lay under his door as if someone had carefully slid it there without making a sound. The handwriting on the front was neat and soft, and it almost felt familiar to him. He picked it up slowly and opened it with a mix of curiosity and confusion. Inside was a simple message written with warmth. It said, "You are stronger than your silence, and your kindness will lead you home." Keanu stared at the words for a long time, wondering who would send him something so personal. It was not like fan mail, and it was not from anyone on his team. It was something different, something strangely comforting. He kept reading the letter again and again until he felt his heartbeat change. It brought back a quiet ache he had been carrying for years, even though he tried his best to hide it. The next morning, he was still thinking about the letter while getting ready for a new project. He had been cast in a special film that brought him back together with Sandra Bullock after many years. He always felt safe around her. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel seen even when they did not want to be seen. When they met on set that day, Sandra smiled at him with the same gentle kindness she had always shown. Keanu smiled back, but there was something heavy in his eyes that she noticed immediately. She walked closer and asked in her soft voice, "Are you all right, Keanu?" He nodded, but it was not a strong nod. It was a quiet one, the kind that hides a story behind it. As the day went on, Keanu found it hard to focus. Scenes that usually came naturally to him felt distant, and he kept thinking about the letter. He wondered why it felt like the words came from someone who truly understood him. At one point during a break, he stepped outside to clear his mind. The air was cool and the studio grounds were silent. He leaned against a wall and closed his eyes, trying to breathe normally. But the moment he did, he remembered something painful. He remembered a time many years ago when life had broken him with loss after loss. He remembered how Sandra had stood beside him when he had felt most alone, even though she never made a big deal about it. She had always helped him without ever saying she was helping. She had done it with kindness and patience. Later that day, while filming an emotional scene, Keanu felt his chest tighten. He remembered the words from the letter, "You are stronger than your silence." He tried to push the thought away, but it stayed with him. Sandra noticed his distraction and quietly asked if he needed a moment. Keanu hesitated, then nodded. They stepped aside, and Sandra placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. She did not ask anything. She simply gave him the space to breathe. He looked at her, and for a moment he wanted to tell her about the strange letter, but something inside him stopped him. He was not ready yet. He still did not understand what he was feeling. When filming ended for the day, Keanu returned home. He hoped to find calm, but instead he found something else waiting. Another envelope, this time left on his front step. He picked it up quickly and opened it with a sense of urgency. The letter inside was longer. It spoke about patience and healing. It mentioned that even the strongest hearts sometimes forget how to rest. What surprised him most was a small detail at the end. It said, "Remember the day you laughed without trying." It was a reference to a moment he had shared with only one person in his life. It was a moment from a set many years ago when Sandra had made him laugh while he was struggling silently inside. No one else had known what that laugh meant to him. No one except her. Keanu sat down slowly and felt the weight of the letter settle deep in his chest. Who was writing these messages? How did they know him so well? Why were they appearing now? He thought about calling someone, but he did not know who to call. Instead, he held the letter close and tried to steady his breathing. He knew one thing. These letters were not random. They were coming from someone who knew the private parts of his heart. Someone who had watched him from a place of love or loyalty. Someone who understood not the actor Keanu Reeves, but the human being he truly was. The next morning, Keanu arrived on set earlier than usual, hoping to distract himself. Sandra was already there reading her script with calm focus. She glanced up and smiled when she saw him. Keanu smiled back, but something about her presence felt different today. It felt reassuring in a way he could not explain. He walked toward her and sat beside her. She looked at him quietly for a moment, then said, "You seem troubled, Keanu." He wanted to deny it, but this time he could not. He simply said, "I am trying to understand something." Sandra nodded softly and waited. She never pressured him. She simply gave him space. He admired that deeply. As they sat there, Keanu felt something shift inside him. He realized that every time his life had fallen apart, Sandra had been there in small, gentle ways. She had always shown him respect and kindness, even when she did not know how much he needed it. He did not know why, but being around her now made the letters feel even more mysterious. Every line in those messages felt like something she would say. But he also knew she would never hide something like that. She was honest in a quiet, honest way. The day moved on, but the mystery deepened inside Keanu. Each scene he filmed with Sandra felt heavier with emotion. Not because of the script, but because he kept wondering if she sensed something he did not. He noticed the way she watched him with concern. He noticed the way she stepped toward him every time he looked distant. He noticed the way she spoke softly as if she was trying to remind him he was not alone. That night when Keanu returned home, he found himself unable to rest. He kept the two letters on the table in front of him and stared at them for a long time. They felt like a puzzle made of emotions he was not ready to face. He wanted answers, but he also feared them. He wondered if these letters were meant to guide him somewhere, guide him back to a part of himself he had forgotten, guide him toward someone he had always trusted but never fully understood. As the night grew quiet, Keanu felt something he had not felt in a long time. He felt the beginning of a journey, not a journey of fame or success, but a journey of the heart. A journey where someone was trying to reach him from the shadows with gentle steps. A journey that had already begun with a single simple message: you are stronger than your silence. Keanu woke up the next morning with a restless mind. He had barely slept. The two letters still sat on his table, and every time he looked at them, he felt a strange mix of comfort and fear. He kept asking himself why someone would send him such personal messages. He did not want to believe it was a coincidence because the words were too precise and too familiar. They carried a softness that reminded him of a time in his life when he was struggling quietly, and someone had helped him understand how to breathe again. He remembered Sandra during those years. She had always been gentle with him, and somehow always knew when he was breaking on the inside even when he hid it well. He could not explain why, but the letters made him think of her again and again in ways he did not fully understand. He arrived on set with a calm face, but his heart was not calm at all. Sandra noticed him the moment he walked in. She always noticed him first, even when she pretended she did not. She watched him silently as he prepared for the first scene. There was a softness in her eyes that almost made him feel exposed. She walked closer and said quietly, "Keanu, something is bothering you." He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I am fine," but his voice did not sound convincing even to himself. Sandra placed her script on the table and said, "Sometimes fine means you do not want to talk about it yet, and that is all right." Her words felt like a warm hand on his chest, steadying his heartbeat. He wanted to thank her, but the words stayed stuck inside him. During filming, Keanu struggled again. The script required him to act through a moment of emotional weakness, and for the first time he was not acting at all. The emotions were real. The confusion from the letters, the memories, they stirred the questions he could not answer. They were becoming too heavy. When the director called a break, Keanu stepped away from the set and sat near the edge of the stage where the shadows were quiet. Sandra followed him, but she did not sit too close. She always gave him space to breathe. She looked at him and said, "I am here if you want to talk." Keanu glanced at her, and for a moment he saw something in her eyes that made him feel like she already knew he was hiding something. He thought about showing her the letters, but a part of him held back. He did not want her to worry more than she already did. Instead, he said something else. He said, "Do you ever feel like someone is guiding you without saying who they are?" Sandra looked at him with gentle curiosity. She thought for a moment, then replied, "Sometimes life sends people to us in quiet ways. Sometimes they want to help without being seen." Her words hit Keanu in a deep place. He wondered again if she knew more than she was saying. But Sandra remained calm, thoughtful, and steady, as if she was speaking from her own experience. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. While the team rearranged equipment, Keanu went to his dressing room to rest for a moment. When he opened the door, he froze. Another envelope was sitting on the chair. He looked around quickly, but no one was nearby. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. He opened the letter and read slowly. It said, "Your heart still carries the weight of old sorrow, but you do not have to carry it alone. Trust the one who has always been by your side even when you did not see her." Keanu felt his chest tighten. The message was clearer than ever. The words almost pointed toward one person, but he refused to believe it. He did not want to jump to conclusions. He folded the letter gently and slipped it into his jacket. When he returned to the set, he felt shaken. Sandra saw it instantly. She walked toward him and asked softly, "Did something happen?" Keanu hesitated and said no, but Sandra did not believe his answer. She stayed quiet, but her eyes stayed on him with concern. He felt like she could see through him, and that made the mystery even more intense. He kept wondering if she was involved or if the letters were guiding him toward her for another reason. As they prepared for the final scene of the day, Keanu tried to steady himself. He forced his mind to focus, but the letter kept echoing inside him. "Trust the one who has always been by your side." He looked at Sandra and felt a strange pull in his chest. She had been there for him many times, even in moments he did not fully acknowledge. She had supported him with her quiet strength and her gentle presence. He remembered moments from years ago when he felt broken and Sandra made him feel safe without ever drawing attention to it. She had always shown him respect and kindness, but he could not understand why someone would point him toward her through these letters. He needed answers, but he also feared what those answers might reveal. After filming wrapped, Sandra approached him again. She looked tired but still warm. She said, "Keanu, you felt different today. Something is shifting inside you." He looked at her, and for a moment he wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to ask her if she knew anything, if she recognized the handwriting, if she sensed something he did not. But before he could speak, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his assistant saying there had been someone seen near his home earlier that day, someone leaving quietly. Someone who did not want to be noticed. Keanu felt a cold wave pass through him. This was no longer just mystery. Someone was truly watching him closely. Sandra noticed the sudden change in his expression and touched his arm gently. She asked, "Are you sure you are all right?" He nodded slowly, but his voice felt fragile when he said, "I think someone is trying to reach me." Sandra looked at him with deep concern, but she did not ask any more questions. She simply said, "Whatever it is, you are not alone." Her voice was soft but strong, and it anchored him in a way he did not expect. When Keanu drove home that night, he kept checking his mirrors. He felt a strange awareness in the air. He arrived home and stepped out slowly. The world around him felt still but heavy. He looked at his front door, half expecting another letter, but there was nothing there. The silence around him felt louder than usual. He walked inside and sat down on his couch, feeling the weight of the 3 letters in his pocket. He placed them on the table and stared at them for a long time. He felt pulled between fear and hope. Someone knew him deeply enough to write these words. Someone knew his past, his pain, his quiet moments of weakness. Someone cared enough to reach him like this. But who would do that without revealing themselves? Why hide? Why stay in the shadows? And why now after all these years? Keanu closed his eyes and breathed slowly. He knew the mystery was only beginning. He felt that these letters were leading him somewhere important, somewhere he had not been ready to go before. And though he did not fully understand it, yet he sensed that the path ahead would reveal something that could change everything he believed about himself and the people who had carried him through his darkest moments. The next morning arrived with a heavy quietness that followed Keanu like a shadow. He woke up earlier than usual because his mind refused to rest. Every moment of the night had been filled with questions and whispers of memories he thought he had learned to live with. The 3 letters on his table were still there, and he felt their presence before he even looked at them. They almost felt alive in the silence of the room. Each one carried words that understood him far more deeply than he understood himself. He reached out and touched them gently, as if they were made of something fragile. For the first time, he wondered if the person behind the letters had been watching not just his life, but his heart. He arrived on set earlier than Sandra and the rest of the team. The studio lights were dim and the air felt colder than usual. He sat in the quiet space and tried to gather himself before the day began. But the moment he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of the past. He saw himself sitting in a small makeup room many years ago during a difficult time. He remembered how he felt lost in those days. He remembered how he could not find the strength to speak. He remembered how Sandra had walked in without knocking. She had brought him a warm cup of tea even though he had not asked for anything. She had sat across from him and smiled softly. She did not tell him to be strong or to move on. She simply sat with him until he felt like he could breathe again. It was a moment he had never forgotten, even though he rarely spoke about it. He opened his eyes slowly. The memory felt too close to the letters. It made him wonder again if Sandra knew more than she was saying, but she never behaved strangely. She was always calm, steady, and honest. If she were the one behind the letters, she would not hide it, or at least that was what he believed. Soon after, Sandra walked in with her usual gentle presence. She noticed Keanu sitting alone and walked toward him. She sat beside him without saying anything at first. Then she looked at him with concern and said, "You look tired. Are you sure you are all right?" Keanu smiled faintly and replied, "I am not sure, but I am trying to understand something." Sandra nodded and said, "Take your time. Understanding comes slowly when the heart is involved." Her words felt like sunlight breaking through a cloud. She always spoke like she knew things without being told. As filming began, the scenes grew emotionally heavy. The story they were working on required deep expressions of grief and healing, and for the first time, Keanu was not acting. The emotions came from inside him, and Sandra could feel it. During one scene where Keanu had to deliver a line about losing something precious, Sandra placed her hand on his shoulder as part of the script. But the moment she touched him, he felt a wave of memory rush through him. It was the same comforting touch he remembered from years ago when she was the only person who understood his silence. His breathing changed for a moment, and Sandra noticed. She held his gaze with genuine concern. The director called cut, but neither of them moved. Something unspoken passed between them, something deep and familiar. During the lunch break, Keanu walked outside to clear his thoughts. The sky was cloudy and the air smelled like rain. He stood under a tree trying to calm the storm inside him. Then something unexpected happened. As he reached into his pocket to check his phone, he felt something unfamiliar. Another envelope. His heart jolted. He had checked his pockets earlier. The envelope was not there. Someone must have put it there on set without him noticing. He opened it quickly, his hands trembling. The letter inside was different, longer, heavier. It read, "You have forgotten how loved you truly are, not by the world, not by the screen, but by the hearts that walked beside you when you were broken. Look closer at who stood with you when you could barely stand. Look at the one who held your silence with her own. She has carried more of your story than you ever knew." Keanu felt a cold shock spread through his chest. The words were too direct, too specific. They pointed toward something he never examined closely. He read the letter 3 more times until the words felt etched into him. Whoever wrote this knew exactly what he had lived through. They knew the details of moments he thought no one else remembered. They knew the presence that had supported him without trying to be seen. As he folded the letter, he heard footsteps behind him. Sandra approached slowly, holding her jacket around her arms. She asked gently, "Is everything okay?" Keanu looked at her with a mix of fear and confusion. For a brief moment, he wondered if she had seen someone place the envelope in his pocket. He wanted to ask her, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he said, "I think someone is trying to tell me something important." Sandra looked at him with a calm understanding and said, "Then you should listen with your heart, not just your mind." Keanu felt his breath catch. The letters said something similar. The connection between the words and her tone made him feel more unsettled. The afternoon scenes were lighter, but Keanu found it impossible to focus. Every time he looked at Sandra, he remembered parts of his past he had buried. Moments when she had comforted him without asking for anything in return. Moments when her kindness was the only warmth he had in his darkest days. He started noticing small things too. The way she watched him when she thought he was not looking. The way she always stood slightly closer on days when he seemed tired. The way her presence felt like a soft reminder that he was not alone. He began to question whether these signs had always been there, and he simply never noticed. After the final scene of the day, the rain began to fall outside the studio. Keanu stepped out into the light drizzle, letting the cool drops settle on his face. He hoped the rain would calm his mind, but instead it brought back another memory. Many years ago, during a film shoot, the two of them had shared a moment during a rainy evening. Keanu had been struggling silently with grief that day, and Sandra had walked with him in the rain without saying much. She had held his arm gently and said, "You do not have to explain your pain for it to be real." He remembered that moment clearly. Now the letters were echoing those same truths. Someone knew these moments too well to be an outsider. As he stood there lost in thought, Sandra walked out carrying an umbrella. She opened it above both of them and said, "You will get sick if you stand in the rain too long." Keanu looked at her with a mix of gratitude and confusion. He whispered, "Thank you." Sandra smiled softly and said, "You do not have to thank me for caring about you." The simplicity of her words almost broke him inside. He wondered for the first time if she had been carrying more of his story than he ever realized. When he returned home that night, he placed all 4 letters on the table. He read each one slowly, letting the words sink into the quiet room. The letters formed a pattern now. The writer knew him deeply. The writer understood his grief. The writer knew his history with Sandra. The writer wanted him to look closer at moments he had forgotten. But the question remained. Why hide? Why now? Why guide him from the shadows instead of stepping into the light? Keanu leaned back and closed his eyes. He felt that the truth was getting closer. Something about these letters was tied to a part of his past he had avoided for a long time. And behind that truth, there was someone whose presence had shaped his life more than he ever admitted. The next morning came with a feeling Keanu could not ignore. Something inside him felt heavier than before, as if the letters were not only guiding him, but also preparing him for something he was not ready to face. He woke slowly, sat on the edge of his bed, and looked at the 4 envelopes placed neatly on the table. They felt like pieces of a story that had been unfolding around him without his knowledge. He touched the top one gently, and wondered again who was watching him so closely, and why they cared enough to write words that reached the deepest and most hidden corners of his heart. He arrived on set later than usual. The team was already busy setting up equipment, and Sandra was speaking with the director when she noticed him enter. Her eyes softened immediately as if she sensed his exhaustion without him saying a single word. She walked toward him with calm steps and stopped beside him. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "You are carrying something you are not sharing." Her voice was gentle but full of truth, and Keanu felt the weight of it settle inside him. He wanted to tell her everything, but he still feared what the truth might lead to. Instead, he simply said, "I am trying to understand something that keeps getting closer." Sandra nodded slowly and replied, "Sometimes the hardest things to understand are the ones we feel instead of see." The day's filming required an emotional confrontation scene. Keanu was supposed to express fear and vulnerability, and Sandra was supposed to comfort him with quiet strength. As the cameras rolled, Keanu found it impossible to separate the script from his real emotions. Every line he spoke felt like something he needed to say in his real life. Every look Sandra gave him felt like it was meant for him and not the character. When she placed her hand on his arm as part of the scene, Keanu felt a sudden tremor inside him. It was the same familiar warmth he remembered from the hardest moments of his past. The same touch that had helped him breathe when he could not find the strength to do so alone. The cameras captured the moment perfectly, but the truth was that the emotion came from somewhere far deeper than acting. After the scene, the director praised them and called for a short break. Keanu stepped outside to breathe, and Sandra followed him quietly. She stood beside him without saying a word. The silence between them was gentle, almost protective. Then she spoke softly, "Keanu, something has been following you. You feel it. I can see it in your eyes." He looked at her with surprise. She had always understood him without needing explanations, but now her words felt almost too close to the truth. He asked her, "What makes you say that?" Sandra looked into the distance for a moment and replied, "Because you look like you are listening for something that is not being said out loud." Keanu felt a shiver run through him. The letters were doing exactly that, speaking to him without revealing themselves. Just then, one of the crew members rushed toward them, saying the director needed Sandra for a moment. She gave Keanu a last glance full of quiet reassurance before walking away. As she disappeared into the building, he felt a sudden ache in his chest, something he did not understand but could not ignore. He decided to take a long walk behind the studio where the noise faded and the space felt calmer. As he walked through the narrow path lined with trees, Keanu noticed something lying on the ground near a bench. His heart skipped a beat. It was another envelope. He picked it up slowly and his hands shook as he opened it. The message inside was shorter but filled with a force that hit him deeply. It said, "Do not run from the truth that is reaching you. She has carried your sorrow for years without telling you why. You will understand soon. Trust the kindness that protected you when you were most fragile." Keanu felt his chest tighten painfully. The letters were becoming more direct now. They were pointing him toward someone who had always walked beside him, and there was only one person who fit that description. He returned to the set with the letter hidden in his pocket, but his emotions were too strong to hide. Sandra noticed the moment she saw him. She walked up to him and asked quietly, "Something happened. Did you find something?" Keanu looked at her, unable to speak for a moment. He felt the truth rising inside him, but fear held it back. Sandra reached out and touched his arm lightly. Her eyes held the same steady warmth that had saved him many times in the past. She said, "You do not have to tell me anything until you are ready." Her voice was so gentle that Keanu nearly broke. During the final scene of the day, Keanu had to perform a moment where his character experiences an accident. The team rehearsed carefully and everything was planned with precision. But when the scene began, something went wrong. As Keanu rushed forward for the action cue, his foot slipped on the polished floor. He fell hard and hit the ground. Everyone shouted, but Sandra was the first to reach him. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands trembling slightly as she touched his face and asked if he was hurt. Her voice was filled with fear, not acting fear, but real fear. The kind that comes from someone who truly cares. Keanu felt a strange mix of pain and comfort. Sandra held his hand tightly and kept whispering, "You are all right, you are all right, I am here." The crew helped him sit up and checked for injuries. Luckily, he was not seriously hurt, but Sandra refused to leave his side. She kept holding his hand even after he said he was fine. Her touch was steady and full of emotion. Keanu noticed the way her eyes glistened as if she had been truly terrified for his safety. He had seen her act frightened before, but this was different. This came from the heart. That evening after filming ended, Keanu returned home feeling uneasy. He had barely taken off his jacket when he noticed something on the table. Another letter, but this one was different. The handwriting was slightly shakier, as if written in a moment of emotional stress. He opened it carefully and read slowly. It said, "Today she nearly lost you. She ran to you before anyone else could move. She has been guarding your heart for longer than you know. Soon you will understand why she has carried this promise. Do not fear the truth. It is not here to hurt you. It is here to heal you." Keanu sat down heavily, his breath trembling. The words echoed the moment on set when Sandra ran to him in fear. Someone had seen it. Someone had written about it instantly. Someone was so close that they witnessed every moment without being seen. He remembered the way Sandra's hands shook when she touched him. He remembered her voice filled with fear. He remembered the warmth of her presence. Now the letters were pointing directly toward her. Keanu leaned back and closed his eyes. Something inside him felt ready to break open. The truth was coming closer with every letter. He could feel it. Something about his past, something about Sandra, something about a promise made long ago was waiting to reveal itself. And he knew the next letter would pull him deeper into the truth he had avoided for years. Keanu woke up before sunrise with a feeling he could not shake. The letters had begun to feel less like messages and more like mirrors reflecting pieces of his past that he had tried to hide even from himself. He sat quietly in the soft morning light, staring at the 5 envelopes arranged carefully on his table. They looked small and harmless, but each one carried a weight that pressed on his heart. He reached for the newest letter and held it for a moment before reading it again. She has been guarding your heart for longer than you know. Soon you will understand why. The sentence echoed in his mind like a gentle whisper repeating itself again and again. He tried to calm his thoughts, but the truth was beginning to rise like a tide he could no longer stop. He remembered Sandra's face when he fell on set. The fear in her eyes was too real, too personal. He remembered the moments from the past when she had been the only person who understood him without asking questions. He remembered how she always seemed to know when he needed someone near him. He began to wonder if he had spent years seeing 1,000 things around him, but missing the one truth standing right beside him. On set that day, Sandra greeted him with a smile, but her eyes showed worry. She walked over to him and said, "You look like you did not sleep at all." Keanu smiled softly and replied, "I am thinking about too many things." Sandra nodded. She always understood without pushing. She placed her hand lightly on his arm and said, "I hope you know you do not have to carry everything alone." The warmth in her voice felt almost identical to the warmth in the letters. Keanu felt his breath tighten. He looked at her for a long moment as if searching for a sign, but Sandra simply smiled gently and continued getting ready for the scene. The filming required a quiet, emotional moment between their characters. Sandra had to sit beside him while he delivered a monologue about loss and hidden pain. As the camera rolled, Keanu felt the lines of the script fade and his real emotions rise to the surface. Sandra watched him closely, her expression soft and full of understanding. She gently placed a hand on his back as part of the scene. The touch was tender, familiar, comforting. Keanu felt a sudden wave of emotion rise in him. He spoke the lines with a trembling voice because they felt too real. When the scene ended, the director praised them, but Keanu could barely breathe. Sandra leaned closer and whispered, "You did beautifully. You always honor the truth even when it hurts." His chest tightened again. The letters had said something similar. Just as they were about to head for lunch, a crew member handed Keanu a small folder with documents he needed to review. He thanked them and walked away. When he opened the folder to check the papers, he froze. Hidden inside the folder was another envelope, a new letter. He looked around quickly, but no one seemed to be watching him. He opened the envelope slowly, his heart pounding. The message was written with more emotion than the previous ones. It said, "She writes her feelings on paper because she cannot speak them out loud. She carries your grief because she made a promise made out of love for someone you once loved. Ask her, Keanu. Ask her, and you will finally see the truth she has protected for so long." Keanu felt the world still around him. The words were too direct, too revealing. Someone was telling him clearly that Sandra knew something very personal, something connected to his past and his deepest pain, something she had never spoken about. He folded the letter with shaking hands and slipped it into his pocket. When he returned to the set, Sandra was sitting alone adjusting a prop. She looked calm, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. He walked toward her slowly, unsure of what to say. When she looked up at him, he saw something he had not noticed before. There was a softness in her expression that felt like she was carrying something inside her that she had not shared with anyone. Keanu sat beside her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy but gentle. Then Keanu took a soft breath and said, "Sandra, I need to ask you something." Her hands stilled. She looked at him with quiet fear. She said, "What is it, Keanu?" His voice trembled slightly when he asked, "Do you know anything about the letters I have been receiving?" Sandra stared at him with widened eyes. She seemed shocked for a moment, then her expression softened into something almost painful. She looked down at her hands and said quietly, "What letters?" Keanu watched her carefully. She was not lying, but she was hiding something. He could feel it. He said, "These letters know things no one else could know, things from my past. They mention someone who made a promise connected to you. Sandra's breath caught. For a moment she could not speak. Keanu saw her eyes fill with emotion. She whispered, "Keanu, I would never hurt you. I hope you know that." He nodded softly. "I do know that. That is why I am asking you." Sandra looked away as if searching for strength. She held her hands together tightly, and after a few moments she said something that made his heart stop. "Keanu, I have kept one promise all my life, a promise that was given to me by someone who cared about you more than you ever knew." Her voice shook slightly. Keanu felt his entire chest grow tight. He whispered, "Who?" Sandra opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the director called them back to filming. She looked at him with sadness and fear and said, "We will talk later, I promise." But the moment she walked away, Keanu felt the truth slipping further from his reach. The rest of the day felt heavy. Each scene felt slower, each moment more intense. Sandra stayed close to him, but she did not speak about what she had started. Her eyes carried something deep, something heavy. Keanu watched her carefully and wondered how many years she had been holding something inside her heart. He wondered if the truth would break him or heal him. He wondered if the letters were preparing him for something far bigger than anyone imagined. After filming ended, Sandra said she needed to check something in her dressing room and would meet him outside in a moment. Keanu waited for her near the exit. The building was quiet and dim as the crew finished packing up. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Sandra did not come out. Keanu felt a strange worry rise in him. He walked down the hallway toward her dressing room. The door was slightly open. He pushed it gently and stepped inside. He stopped. Sandra was sitting at her small table. Her shoulders were shaking. She was wiping her eyes quietly as if she did not want anyone to hear her cry. In front of her was an open notebook, and beside it was an envelope that looked exactly like the ones he had been receiving. Keanu felt his breath stop in his chest. The truth was suddenly closer than ever, closer than he was prepared for, closer than Sandra seemed ready to reveal. Keanu stood silently at the doorway, unable to move. His breath felt trapped in his chest as he watched Sandra sitting at the table with her shoulders trembling. She wiped her eyes again and pressed a hand to her mouth as if trying to keep her emotions from spilling out. The soft light in the room made everything look still and fragile. Keanu felt his heart pounding as he noticed the envelope lying next to her notebook. It looked exactly like the ones he had been receiving. Same color, same size. Same softness in the paper. He felt something shift inside him, something heavy and painful and full of truth. He stepped inside slowly. The floor creaked gently under his feet and Sandra looked up quickly. Her eyes widened when she saw him. She tried to hide the envelope, but her hands were shaking too much. Keanu walked closer, his voice soft and trembling as he said, "Sandra, tell me the truth, please." She closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength she had been holding back for years. When she opened them again, there was no hiding left in her expression. Her voice came out quiet and broken when she said, "I did not want you to find out this way." Keanu sat beside her and waited. He did not ask again. He simply waited because he understood that whatever she was carrying was something she had protected for a very long time. Sandra placed her hands on her lap and lowered her gaze. After a long silence, she whispered, "Keanu, the letters are from me." His breath caught. His heart felt like it sank deeper into his chest, but she was not finished. She said, "But they were never my words, not fully. I only delivered them because I made a promise." Keanu's eyes softened with confusion and sorrow. He asked slowly, "A promise to who?" Sandra looked at him, then looked away as if the memory hurt too much. She whispered, "To someone you loved deeply, someone who loved you more than you ever knew." Keanu felt his hands go cold. He whispered her name, the name of the woman he had lost many years ago, the one whose memory still lived inside the quiet spaces of his heart. Sandra nodded gently and tears filled her eyes. "She said she gave me these letters before she passed. She asked me to give them to you when your heart was heavy again. She wanted you to know you were not alone even after she was gone." Keanu felt his eyes fill with tears. He had never known that his late partner had shared something so personal with Sandra. He whispered, "Why you?" Sandra looked at him with trembling emotion and said, "Because she trusted me. She said I understood your silence. She said you listened to my heart even when you could not listen to your own. She asked me to look after you, but she made me promise not to tell you where the messages came from until the right moment." Keanu felt a sharp ache in his chest. Everything began to make sense. Every gentle message, every comforting line, every detail that only someone who understood his deepest pain would write. It was all connected to love, to loyalty, to a promise born from kindness, not from secrecy. He whispered, "Sandra, why did you wait until now?" Sandra wiped her tears and said, "Because you were strong for so long. You carried yourself with grace even in your grief. But then I saw you changing again. I saw the weight returning to your eyes. I knew it was time to help you remember that you were still loved. I did not want to hurt you. I only wanted to honor the promise I made. Her voice broke on the last word. Keanu felt tears fall down his cheeks. He reached out and held her trembling hands gently. He whispered, "You have helped me more than I ever knew." Sandra shook her head softly. She said, "I never wanted you to feel watched or afraid. I only wanted you to feel guided. I never expected the letters to affect you this deeply. I just wanted you to heal. I wanted you to remember that love does not end even when life does." Keanu felt a deep warmth spread through him. It was not pain. It was something softer, something healing. He looked at her with gratitude filling his voice as he said, "You carried a promise that was not yours. You carried it because your heart is kind." Sandra looked down and whispered, "I carried it because you deserved to feel protected. You deserved to feel understood. And I knew how to do that because I cared about you too." The room felt still for a long moment. Nothing moved except their breathing. The truth hung between them like a soft blanket covering years of unspoken feelings. Keanu leaned back, slowly trying to absorb everything he had just learned. The letters were not a mystery anymore. They were a bridge between the love he had lost and the friendship he still had. They were a tribute from someone who wanted him to heal and entrusted Sandra to help him find peace. Sandra finally picked up the last letter from the table and held it out to him. Her hands were still shaking as she said, "This is the final one. I kept it because she asked me to give it to you when you were ready. I think today you are." Keanu took the envelope gently. The paper felt warm from her hands. He opened it slowly and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was faint but familiar. It was the handwriting of the woman he had once planned a future with. His eyes blurred with tears as he read. "Keanu, if you are reading this, it means you are hurting again in a way you do not speak out loud. I want you to know that you are loved far beyond the moments you can see. Sandra understands your silence in a way I always admired. She carries a light that will guide you when mine can no longer reach you. Trust her. She has a heart that listens to yours. Do not be afraid to let her help you. She is stronger than she appears, and her kindness is the gentlest protection you will ever know. Do not live your life in grief. Live it in gratitude. You are not alone, and you never will be." Keanu lowered the letter slowly. Tears streamed down his face, but they felt different from before. They felt lighter. They felt like release. Sandra had tears falling down her cheeks too, but she did not try to hide them. They sat together, silent but connected by something deeper than words. It was not romance. It was not obligation. It was a bond born from respect, kindness, loyalty, and the kind of understanding only rare souls share. Keanu finally whispered, "Thank you, not just for the letters, but for you." Sandra looked at him with soft, trembling eyes and said, "You deserved the truth. You deserved peace. I just kept my promise." Keanu gently placed his hand over hers and held it, not in love, but in deep gratitude. He said, "You did more than keep a promise. You carried me through the silence I could not face alone." When he walked out of the dressing room later that evening, he felt different. Lighter. Whole in a way he had not felt in years. The truth had not broken him. It had healed him. Sandra walked beside him, calm and steady as always. He knew now that her presence in his life was not a coincidence. It was a gift left by someone he once loved and protected by someone who loved in her own quiet way. The next day, Keanu wrote a tribute that came from the deepest part of his heart. A tribute not only to the woman he lost, but also to the woman who kept her promise. A tribute to kindness, loyalty, and the soft strength that had guided him back to himself. Sandra read it silently with tears in her eyes. She hugged him gently, and he hugged her back with full respect and gratitude. Keanu finally understood that the letters were never meant to confuse him. They were meant to bring him home to the truth. A truth filled with love, friendship, healing, and the quiet beauty of one person keeping a promise for many years simply because her heart was kind.